You know, the pirate. Everyone does. The parrot on the shoulder, the peg leg, the eye patch, the map with the big red X, the chest of gold buried on a beach, the plank you get marched off at Cutlass Point while a man in a big hat laughs and says, "Arr." You've seen it 1,000 times. In movies, in cartoons, on the label of a rum bottle, on a kid's Halloween costume. It's one of the most complete, most confident pictures we carry around in our heads. If I asked you to draw a pirate right now, you could do it without thinking. And almost none of it is true. Not exaggerated, not pattern, not a bit off. I mean, the core of it, the erinnerungen, the treasure map, the walking the plank, the murderous, lawless free-for-all, was mostly invented after the fact by novelists in Hollywood, decades and in some cases centuries after the last real pirate was hanged. Here's the part that's going to bother you, though. The real pirates were stranger than the myth. Because while Europe was running kingdoms on the divine right of kings, while your king was your king because God said so, a few thousand thieves and runaways out on the Atlantic were quietly holding elections, writing constitutions, voting their bosses out of a job, paying out injury compensation from a common fund. Now, I'm not going to sell you a pirates were secretly the good guys story, because that's just a different fairy tale. They robbed people. Some of them were genuinely brutal. But what they built on those ships is one of the weirder, more radical experiments in how human beings organize power. And nobody taught it to you because the cartoon was more fun and because the people who wrote the history had every reason to keep it a cartoon. So let's take the cartoon apart, piece by piece, and let's see what's actually underneath. First, let's be fair to the myth because it didn't come from nowhere, and if you believe it for good reasons. The picture in your head is real, and it's just real fiction. Almost all of it traces back to a surprisingly small handful of sources. There's Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island from 1883. That one novel basically invented the pirate we know. The treasure map, the X marking the spot, the black spot, the one-legged Long John Silver with a parrot on his shoulder. The historian David Cordingly, who wrote one of the definitive books on all this, has said the effect of Treasure Island on how we see pirates cannot be overstated, and that the treasure map leading to buried gold is an entirely fictional device. Then, going further back, there's a book from 1724 credited to a Captain Charles Johnson called A General History of the Pirates. It collected the life stories of the famous pirates, and it's genuinely one of our most important sources. But it also cheerfully blended real events with rumor and outright invention, and a lot of what people know about pirates started as a good yarn in that book. And then Disney and 100 movies took the whole stew and turned the dial up to 11. So when you picture a pirate, you are not picturing a historical person. You're picturing a character, a brilliantly designed character, built up over 200 years by people whose actual job was to entertain you, not to inform you. And the character makes sense. Pirates were outlaws. Outlaws are frightening. It's completely intuitive to imagine that a man who robs ships for a living must be a chaotic, bloodthirsty maniac who'd make you walk the plank for looking at him sideways. That's the version that fits our gut. That's the version that sells rum. The problem is that chaotic, bloodthirsty maniac is a catastrophic way to actually run a criminal enterprise. And piracy, once you strip off the romance, was exactly that. An enterprise. A violent, illegal, high-risk business with a very short career expectancy. And a business like that, more than almost any other, needs rules. It needs trust. It needs a way to stop the crew from robbing each other. What those rules actually were is where the entire picture starts to crack. Let's start with the crown jewel, the single most famous pirate punishment of all time: walking the plank. You know the image exactly. The blindfolded captive, hands bound behind his back, prodded along a wooden board sticking out over the water while a jeering crew watches until the plank tips and he drops, screaming into the sea. Here's the thing. In the entire golden age of piracy, roughly the 1650s to the 1720s, the era of Blackbeard, Bartholomew Roberts, Calico Jack, the pirates you've actually heard of, there is essentially no reliable record of it ever happening. The National Maritime Museum in Greenwich states it about as plainly as a museum can. Pirates never made their victims walk the plank. Historians who go hunting for real cases come back with, at most, a tiny scatter of disputed incidents. And nearly all of those are from the 1820s, a full century after the Golden Age had ended and the great pirates were long dead. So where did the picture come from? Fiction, again. The phrase starts turning up in stories in the late 1700s, and Daniel Defoe, yes, the Robinson Crusoe man, was among the first English writers to have his characters do it. Later writers polished it until it felt like ancient tradition. Believing pirates walk the plank is a bit like believing medieval knights fought with lightsabers because you saw it in a film. Great image. Wrong century. Wrong everything. And here's the first genuinely counterintuitive bit, the first brain wrinkle. The reason pirates didn't stage theatrical executions is that most pirates preferred not to kill anyone at all. Follow the incentives. If you got a reputation for slaughtering every crew you captured, then every single ship you attacked from then on would fight you to the last man. Because if they're all going to die anyway, why not take some pirates down with them? That's a fantastic way to get yourself killed over a cargo of sugar. But a merchant crew that believes it'll be spared if it gives up? That crew hands over the goods and sails home grateful. So pirates wanted the reputation for violence, the fear, precisely so that they would almost never actually have to be violent. The terror was marketing. A quiet surrender was the whole business plan, which, funnily enough, brings us to the flag. Because the Jolly Roger is the second thing everyone gets backwards. We think of the black skull and crossbones as a pure symbol of murder. It was closer to the opposite. That flag was a negotiating tool. When pirates ran up the black flag, the message to the target was essentially, "We know who we are, you know who we are. Surrender now and you'll be treated fairly." It was only if you refused that the black flag came down and the red one went up. And the red flag, the bloody flag, was the terrifying one. Red meant no quarter, no mercy. We're coming, and no one gets spared. Given that choice, most merchant captains, understandably, chose to hand over the cargo, which is exactly what the pirates wanted, because a fight risked their lives and damaged the very ship they were trying to steal. Let me introduce you to two people. Neither is famous, both are exactly the kind of person this story actually happened to, over and over. The first is a merchant sailor. Let's call him Tom Price. Tom is 26, and he works a cargo run out of Bristol, and his life is, to put it plainly, miserable. On a merchant ship in the early 1700s, the captain is a small, absolute god. He can flog you, cheat you out of the wages you were promised, feed you food that's gone to rot, and drive you until your body gives out. And there is no one anywhere in Tom's world who will stop him. No court that cares, no vote, no appeal. Sailors of this era were routinely beaten, underpaid, half-starved, and eaten alive by disease. That's not me editorializing. That's just the documented reality of the job. One gray morning off the coast of West Africa, Tom's ship is run down by a faster vessel. A black flag climbs the mast, and Tom, who has heard all the horror stories, is bracing to die. Until he notices something strange. Half the men poring over the rail are, unmistakably, having the best day of their lives. They're laughing. And more than a few of them look exactly like Tom, ordinary sailors who, a year ago, were standing on a deck just like his. Their captain doesn't scream, doesn't wave a sword in anyone's face. He does something that would have been unthinkable on any legal ship. He asks Tom's crew a question. Does anyone want to join? Not surrender or die. An actual invitation? Because here's the reality underneath the drama. An enormous share of pirates were volunteers. They were former merchant and Navy sailors who had done the brutal math, a life of being flogged for low pay and zero say, versus the pirates' offer of an equal vote, an equal share, and a captain you could fire. The historian Marcus Rediker, who has spent decades studying these men, describes the pirate ship as a world turned upside down, a place where the people at the absolute bottom of the sea's brutal hierarchy suddenly, briefly, ran everything. Now meet the second person. Call him Kofi. A year ago, Kofi was chained in the hold of a slave ship. When pirates took that ship, he was given a choice that the entire legal world around him would never have offered: join the crew as a free man with a vote and a share, or stay cargo. He is standing at the rail beside those laughing pirates right now. And when Tom looks over and sees him, a formerly enslaved man, armed, free, and equal member of the crew, Tom understands, in an instant, that everything he was told about these people was, at best, half the story. Tom looks back at his own captain, the one who has flogged him twice this single voyage. He looks at the grinning thieves offering him a vote and a fair cut. You already know what a great many Toms chose. So let's say you're Tom. Let's put you on that pirate ship 1 week after you signed on. Forget the cartoon. What is your life actually like now? The first surprise is the paperwork. Before you're truly one of them, you have to sign the articles, the ship's written code of conduct. Someone reads them out loud because a good chunk of the crew can't read, and you add your name or just your mark if you can't write, and you swear to it. Sometimes with your hand on a Bible, sometimes on a pair of crossed pistols, or a boarding axe, or while sitting on a cannon, kind because pirates, God love them, had a flair for ceremony. And what you're signing is nothing like what you braced for. You expected lawlessness. Instead, you are signing a contract that gives you rights. You get a vote. Not as a figure of speech, a real vote in all affairs of moment, as one famous code phrased it. Where the ship sails next, which prize you chase, whether you fight or run, you get a say. You help elect the captain. And here's the part that would freeze any ordinary sailor in his tracks. If that captain becomes a tyrant, or a coward, or just an idiot, the crew can vote him straight back down to an ordinary deckhand. It happened constantly. Real captains were deposed by their crews for cowardice in battle, for being too harsh, for making a bad call. You get a share. When you take a prize, the loot is split by a formula everyone agreed to before you ever set sail. The captain takes more than you, but shockingly, little more. Often just 2 shares to your 1. The quartermaster, who's basically the crew's elected representative and handles the loot, gets about the same. Think about where you came from. On the Navy and merchant ships, the officers and the distant owners took nearly everything, and you took scraps. Here, the gap between the boss and the lowest man on board is almost embarrassingly small. You get a real say in punishment too, because the quartermaster, not the captain, usually handles discipline for the small stuff, and serious matters can go to the whole crew. The captain isn't a king here. He's more like a wartime specialist. He gets nearly absolute authority in the middle of a battle when you need one person making fast decisions, and then the moment the fight is over, that power drains right back to the crew. And then there's the one that always gets people. You get, and I promise I am not inventing this, workers' compensation. If you lose an arm in a boarding action, the articles pay you a fixed sum out of the common fund right off the top, before the rest of the loot is divided among everyone else. There is a literal, written, agreed-upon price list for injuries. We're about to look at the actual numbers, and they are genuinely wild. You stand there on the deck, surrounded by this crew of runaways and escaped slaves and fed-up sailors, every one of them an equal, every one of them signed to the same page. And it dawns on you, slowly. The most feared men on the ocean have, almost by accident, built one of the fairest workplaces on Earth. All right, let me put the actual receipts on the table, because this is the part people refuse to believe until they see it. We have the real pirate codes. Several of them survived, largely because they were seized and read out as evidence when pirates were put on trial. The most famous belonged to the crew of Bartholomew Roberts. Black Bart, a Welshman and one of the most successful pirates who ever lived, By many counts, he took more than 400 ships in a career of just 2 or 3 years. Article 1 of Roberts's Code, as recorded in that 1724 General History of the Pirates, reads, and this is very close to the original wording, "Every man has a vote in affairs of moment." Every man. Written into a pirate ship's constitution in the early 1720s. That is nearly a full century before the French Revolution, and about 70 years before the United States Constitution was signed. A gang of sea robbers wrote down, "Every man gets a vote," while most of the so-called civilized world was still ruled by kings who answered to no one. Now the compensation, because this is the detail that breaks people's brains. Roberts's articles specified that if a man lost a limb in service, he would receive 800 pieces of 8, Spanish silver dollars, serious money, from the common stock, with smaller sums, proportionally, for lesser injuries. And Roberts wasn't unusual. Captain John Phillips's code from around the same time set the rate at 400 pieces of 8 for the loss of a joint and 800 for a whole limb. Some of the older buccaneer codes got even more specific, going body part by body part, and even pricing a right arm higher than a left, on the entirely practical logic that most men are right-handed, and losing your dominant arm hurts your livelihood more. Sit with that. It is a disability insurance schedule, a no-fault injury payout system written by criminals. Roughly a century and a half before most industrialized countries got around to offering anything like workers' compensation to their legal, law-abiding workers. Insurance historians have straight up pointed at the pirate code as an early ancestor of modern workers' comp. The outlaws were ahead of the governments. Then there's the question of who was actually on these ships. And here I want to be careful because this is the area where it's easiest to romanticize and where serious historians genuinely disagree about the numbers. But the careful research, Marcus Rediker and others working from trial records and victim testimony, makes it clear that pirate crews were strikingly diverse for their era. A meaningful proportion of Golden Age pirates were black men. A great many of them escaped from slavery. And on at least some ships, those men could vote, carry weapons, and take a full and equal share of the plunder, rights they had essentially nowhere else in the entire Atlantic world. Blackbeard's own crew, by several contemporary accounts, was a large share black men, at points more than half. Now, the crucial caution, because the truth here is genuinely double-edged. Pirates were not running a liberation movement. Some pirate crews robbed slave ships and then sold the human beings aboard them for profit, treating them as cargo just like everyone else did. It was not noble, it was not consistent. But it is also true that on the deck itself, for the specific men who joined the crew, a pirate ship could be one of the only places in that world where a formerly enslaved man could stand armed and equal among white sailors and cast the same vote they did. Both of those things are true at once, and that contradiction is the whole point of this video. The reality is messier, darker, and far more interesting than either bloodthirsty monsters or secret heroes. And to close the evidence, let me hand you one clean image that ties it together. That flag and that reputation, doing exactly the work they were built to do. In 1720, Bartholomew Roberts sailed straight into the harbor at Trepassey, in Newfoundland, with his black flags flying. There were 22 ships anchored there, and the crews of all 22 of them took one look, panicked, and abandoned their vessels without a single shot fired. That is the entire pirate strategy captured in one moment. No battle, no boarding, no plank. Just a flag, a reputation, and 22 crews deciding this was very much not worth dying over. So let's pull back, because this leaves us with a genuinely uncomfortable question. We took a group of people who had built something authentically radical. Elected leadership, shared wealth, written rights, compensation for the injured, a workplace more equal than almost anything on land. And we remembered them as cartoon villains with parrots and buried treasure. Meanwhile, the great powers of that same age, the empires with their divine right kings, their absolute captains, their slave ships, we tend to file away as the serious, legitimate grown-ups of history. It's worth asking honestly why the story broke that way. And a big part of the answer is uncomfortable. The people who wrote the histories were, broadly speaking, the same people the pirates were robbing. The merchants, the empires, the crown. When you control the story, the outlaws who reject your authority don't get to be remembered as a political movement or as a symptom of how badly you were treating your own sailors. They get to be monsters, villains, eventually a fun theme for a child's birthday party. And that is a remarkably effective way to make sure nobody ever asks the awkward question, and which is why so many ordinary, desperate people kept running off to join them. Which leaves the real debate, and I'm going to hand it to you straight, without pretending I've got the tidy answer. Were the pirates a genuine, if ugly, experiment in freedom and equality, living proof that ordinary people handed the chance will reach for democracy and fairness centuries before their rulers ever offer it to them? Or is that just a newer, more flattering myth we've built to replace the old one, dressing up thieves and killers as revolutionaries because, once again, it makes for a better story? Honestly, I don't think there's a clean answer, and I'd be suspicious of anyone who tells you there is. They were robbers, and they were on their own decks, more democratic than very nearly any nation on earth at the time. History is completely allowed to be both of those things at once. In fact, it usually is. Here's what I love about this one, though. The pirate you were sold, the peg leg, the parrot, the buried chest, the plank, isn't exactly a lie. It's a costume. And underneath the costume is something so much more interesting than a monster. A crew of the lowest, most disposable, most thrown-away people of their entire age who got their hands on a ship, and given the rare chance to build any kind of society they wanted, chose to build one with votes and fair shares and written rights and a payout if you lost an arm. Not because they were saints, they weren't, but because out there with no king watching, that way simply worked better. That's the thing about looking under the costume. The real story is almost always stranger, messier, and more deeply human than the version on the rum bottle. And the wild part is it's just sitting there in the trial transcripts, in the seized articles, in the testimony of the people who were there, waiting for anyone curious enough to actually go and read it. So the next time someone busts out the R and the hook hand at a party, you get to quietly decide whether to ruin it for them. My honest advice? Let them keep the parrot. It's a good look, but maybe, just maybe, mention the elections.